Hi and welcome to another Checiegirl art chat. So today I thought I would talk about acrylics. So let's start with types of acrylics. Now there's a range of acrylics out there. I've used some, but I've mostly stuck to the affordable side because you don't really have to spend a lot to get decent acrylics. So like if you're starting off and you go to your local craft stores and you see craft paint, I wouldn't pick it up personally because I find that craft paints are finally like mixed media and stuff, because like when it comes to mixed media there's so much layers and stuff. It doesn't really matter, at least for the kind of mixed media I do, what kind of paints I use, especially if the majority of the piece won't be made from acrylics. But if you're going to do like an acrylic painting, craft paint isn't the best because it's craft paint, it's not acrylic paint. So I would avoid craft paints if you're going to do mostly acrylic paints. But if that's all that's available to you, you can definitely use that when you're starting off. Craft paints tend to be on the cheaper side. So if that's all you have, don't worry about it. You know, if you want to create with what you have. So I would go with acrylics. Now, I've only ever really used affordable acrylics. I've never used like the higher end acrylics. And I've done quite a few techniques and stuff with them. You really don't need fancy stuff. Now, the brands that I've used, off the top of my head, I live in the UK, so you have like reference of what I'm talking about. I've used acrylics from The Works, that's a craft store. I've used acrylics from Wilko's. I've used quite a few acrylics from like kind of cheaper stores, as well as some nicer acrylics like Reeves and De La Rowney. Now, The Works and like Wilko's acrylics are pretty cheap. They work okay, they're alright. But I prefer like Reeves and De La Rowney. I think the opacity is pretty good. The thickness isn't too bad, especially I really like to do palette knife paintings with acrylics, so I find Reeves and like De La Rowney have just enough thickness that I can get some of the texture I'm looking for, but like The Works and Wilko's is a little bit runnier, so I can't really get as much thickness. I can still use it, it's just a little bit trickier. So you can just go to your local craft art store and just pick up some paints. You know, you can watch a few reviews, see what the best paints will be for you, and then kind of go from there. Now, on the pricier sides of acrylics, like the higher end stuff, you have full body acrylics. Now, I've never used it. I thought I might upgrade to that if I really stuck with acrylics and mixed media, but since I tend to do like more watercolor and gouache, and even if it is mixed media, the base is like watercolors. I never really got into the higher end acrylics, but full body is great for palette knife paintings because it's in the name, it's full body, it's thick, it really keeps the fullness. Like if you put down a really thick layer of paint, it'll keep that level of paint. With the more affordable acrylics, it might sink a little bit. It may not keep that peak that you might add with the palette knife. So full body is great for that. And then you also have fluid acrylics. Again, it's in the name, great for dripping, very vibrant colors, really nice transparency. Like, you know, it's the higher end stuff. So for when you're starting off, no need to worry about that. I know from experience of watching people who have all that higher end stuff, sometimes you feel like you need it. But when you're starting off, you really want to focus on building up your skills and kind of getting used to like different techniques and stuff before you get into it. Because if I had, say, bought the higher end stuff, and now that I barely use acrylics, I would have all this higher end stuff, and like I have quite a few acrylics that I don't use that regularly, and I would feel really bad if I had the higher end stuff because I put quite a bit of money into that. So I'm glad that I stuck to the more affordable paints for when I first started off, because now acrylics is something I only really go to when I'm like painting on items. Like when I decorated a boomerang, I use acrylics. When I did my smudge bowl, I used acrylics. And whenever I do like mixed media, like how I used to do it, I'll use acrylics. So I don't use acrylics that much. So yeah, definitely stick to the more affordable stuff when you're starting off. Now, what can you do with acrylics? You can do all sorts of things with acrylics. The nice thing about acrylics is it's like an in-between of oils and watercolor in a way. Now, it can kind of add like you can kind of paint a bit like oils, like you can add the textures, the layers like you would with oils, but it's a faster drying time. So instead of waiting days, weeks, months, years sometimes for your oil paintings to dry, it could be like a few hours, especially if you're like, it all depends on how many layers you put on. Like sometimes I would have to leave mine like, you know, for a few hours to dry before I go in again when I'm doing palette knife painting, because it's a lot of layers. And sometimes it's a few minutes. Now, of course, that could be a pro for my fellow impatient creators. I am definitely impatient, which is why I like how fast acrylics dry. But, you know, if you want to spend a little bit more time like how you would with oils, then that may not be a pro for you. And I'll talk about some mediums that you can use to like lengthen drying times a little bit. But yeah, it dries really fast, and then you can water it down to kind of look like water, which is really cool, which is like was my stepping stone to watercolors. I would water it down, and the nice thing is because it dries permanently, you can then add layers like how you wouldn't be able to with watercolors, because watercolors don't dry permanently. But if you water your acrylics down too much, it'll kind of break apart the binding and stuff, so sometimes that can take away from the permanent aspect. And again, I'll talk about mediums that you can use to help with that. But again, when you're starting off, you don't really need all of those mediums. You can just experiment, and especially if it's like in a sketchbook, you know, nothing that's going to sell, you really don't have to worry about that. You know, if you're just practicing, building up your skill, you don't have to worry too much about that. I thought I would just, you know, point that out just in case. And then you can use quite a few tools with acrylics. You can use paintbrushes. I would say, just like top of my head, the paintbrushes I like to use are the synthetic ones. I started off with like the more natural hair ones. I don't think they were actually natural hair. I think they were just like natural hair brushes, and I find they're a bit rough. I prefer synthetics because I like to put down like smoother layers of acrylics. And flat brushes are really useful. Filbert, which is like a flat brush but like a rounder tip, is really nice with acrylics. Round brushes are good, like with a good point. Then some, oh gosh, what's the name of those brushes? A rigger brush, which is like the very long bristle brushes, very thin, great for adding details. So, you know, you can get like a range of paintbrushes. And again, it all depends. Like if you're doing more abstract, you may not need a detail brush. You can have really nice big brushes, smaller brushes. It all depends. And again, check out reviews and stuff to see what you might prefer. But again, if you're starting off, you can just get a set, like a set of different size brushes. Just make sure that the hairs won't like completely fall off. If you can test that in the store, that'll be great. Yeah, because you don't want to get a paintbrush where the bristles are falling out, because that's really frustrating. So, you know, I wouldn't go for like the cheapest one. Again, if that's all you can do, that's fine. But I would go for ones that look a little bit nicer, but that's like quite affordable. I did do a review on some paintbrushes from Hobbycraft that you can use with acrylics. They're really nice and affordable, but like bristles don't fall out. They're lasting me a good while. They're really good. And another thing, make sure and wash your brushes very well, because acrylics can be damaging to your brushes. So if you make sure and wash them well, don't let them sit in the water, they'll last you longer. Especially when you're starting off, you don't want to keep on buying new brushes. I killed quite a few brushes with my acrylics, so yeah, treat them well. And then my favorite tools to use with acrylics is palette knives. I love palette knife painting. If I'm only using acrylics, I'll most likely just go straight to a palette knife, to be honest. The textures you can use, you can carve into the paints with the palette knife. It's really nice. So if you're trying out acrylics and say you've been using brushes mainly, definitely give palette knives a go, because it's nice and fun. It's great for abstract work and just adding textures. It's really fun. And then you can use them with stamps, stencils, all sorts. Like, you can use acrylics on almost everything. It's great. And then acrylic mediums. So I'll start off with like the slow drying mediums. The slow drying mediums, when you add it to your paint, it does exactly what it says. It slows down the drying. Now, I don't really use it that too much because, again, I'm very impatient. If I want to do a piece a bit like oils, then I'll use it. But what I mainly use the slow drying medium for is if I have a lot of paint on my palette, but my piece needs to dry or I need to take a break, I'll add like a drop. Also, like on the bottle, it'll have instructions on how much to add to your acrylics. Because you don't want to add too much because then the acrylics may never dry. So I might just add like a drop or two to the paint on the palette, mix it in, cover it with some like cling film or something, and then I can come back and my paint won't be completely dry. So that's how I like to use it. I don't tend to use it on my piece all the time, but that will definitely help to lengthen the blending time, especially if you really want to get into your blending and a bit like oils, you can lengthen that, and you don't have to rush too much. And then you have your thinning mediums. Now the thinning mediums helps to thin out the paints without breaking apart the binder, so you still have that permanence that comes with the acrylics, but you're able to thin it out really nicely. Now from the top of my head, I cannot think of a time that I've used that, but I do know it's out there, and I've seen it like in videos and stuff. It looks really useful. So what I just try to avoid is not to water it down too much with water. Yeah, because you really don't want to break those apart, because then it just kind of loses, it can lose its color. Yeah, you don't want to water it to an inch of its life. And again, when you're starting off, you really don't need this stuff. Those two mediums, I would say, is when you've really gotten into it, and you're starting to kind of upgrade and like add to your arsenal of paints and tools and stuff. And then Gesso. Now, Gesso is an acrylic medium that's used to prime surfaces, and it's really useful. So when you buy like a ready-made canvas and it says that it's been primed, that's what it means, it's been gessoed. And I would add gesso to what you have, because it's great if you want to paint on different surfaces. So on maybe air dry clay projects. Air dry clay is very porous, and if you go straight on with your acrylics, it'll just suck in all the paint. You can end up using a lot more paint than you wanted to, and it's not as nice of like a level surface. So when you prime it, not only does it take away the porous aspect of the surface, which helps you save paint, it also gives a nice level smooth area for you to paint on, so it's a bit more enjoyable. And as it goes, the same for wood. I'm not too sure about metal. I mean, because sometimes on slicker surfaces like metal, I would say you most likely need to kind of sand it down to give something to grip for like the gesso. But like wood, air dry clay, fabric, you put some gesso on there and it takes away the porousness. It won't suck away all your paint, and it's a much nicer surface to paint on. And you can also use it to cover up your mistakes, or like if you've done a canvas, you don't like it at all, you cannot stand it, just cover it in gesso, start again. Gesso is absolutely brilliant, and it's a really useful medium to have. And you can also tint gesso, like if say you want to start off on a colored background, you can tint the gesso with a different like a color, and then say go over the canvas, and then you won't be starting just on plain white. Now if you don't have gesso, you can use acrylic paint, like just some white acrylic paint. That's totally fine. Just the white acrylic paint may not be as opaque, and it may not go as far as gesso would, and it'll also use up a lot of your paint. You will use a lot of white paint anyway when you're painting, so one thing I would say, buy smaller tubes of paints that you're getting, especially if you're trying out. You don't want to get really big tubes, because you don't want to like get a whole bunch of big tubes and then not like that paint, that brand. So get smaller like the colors, and then you can always get bigger tubes of the colors you really like, but definitely get a bigger tube of white, because you'll go through that quicker, and gesso will help you save your white paint. And then modeling paste. Now this kind of goes a little bit more into like mixed media. Modeling paste is an acrylic medium though, But modeling paste is great for adding texture through stencils, using palette knives. You can carve into it. You can hit it with a heat gun and it'll bubble up. Modeling paste is awesome. And you can also tint modeling paste to again add like color to it. Put it through a stencil, whatever you like, and you can then paint over the modeling paste. Modeling paste is really fun. And I have quite a few mixed media videos where I use those mediums. So if you want to check that out, I will put an iCard. If you're on YouTube, I'll put an iCard so you can click through to like a playlist. But if you're not on YouTube, I will have it in the link in the description so you can check those out if you want to kind of see how I've used acrylics and like gesso and modeling paste. And then a good way to protect your pieces, I personally don't do this if they're on canvas, but if it's on another surface like say a boomerang that I once decorated or like a smudge bowl, I will varnish it. Especially if it's going to be handled a lot, I varnish the piece. If it's not going to be handled, I don't varnish it because I'm not a huge fan of glossy finishes. Especially on canvas, I prefer matte. Now you do have gloss and matte varnish. I just don't use it. Yeah, I just don't use it. So, but if it's going to be handled, I definitely will varnish it. Now I tend to varnish things with gloss varnish because I do like to use things like gold paint on my pieces a lot, and matte varnish will kind of take away from that. But gloss varnish will not only make the gold look shinier, it'll make it look brighter. It really brings out the colors, like it makes them look richer. It kind of adds more depth to what you've painted. So gloss varnish is really nice to add to things. And again, I'll most likely link those videos where I've used the gloss varnish in the description. I'll pop some up in the iCard so you can check those out. It's really good to protect your pieces. Now, one thing, it is not waterproof. I did put it on a paint pot hoping it would be okay, but it's still a paint pot that was made from air dry clay, but it still got kind of wet, so you can't really protect your pieces from water that well with the varnish, but still just help to kind of protect it from dust and stuff. Yeah, and there's all sorts of different varnishes. The varnishes I use is from Winsor & Newton, and it's like in a tub. I know there's spray varnishes, there's all sorts of varnishes. So again, you can look at reviews, see which one you would prefer. But yeah, the varnishes I've used is gloss varnish mostly, and I have used matte varnish every now and again, but mostly I use gloss varnish. So yeah, I think that's it. I've touched on everything I wanted to. If you have any further questions, you can pop them down in the comments. I will happily respond to you. If you enjoyed, please do let me know. Give me a thumbs up on YouTube if you're listening there. And I upload every Friday on YouTube, so please do subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notification bell so you don't miss any of my new videos. And I will also have a link to my YouTube channel if you're listening on another platform. If you want to check out my videos, I have a podcast at the beginning of the month, a studio vlog at the end, and then a couple process videos in the middle. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, if you have any questions, please do let me know. And I will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. Bye.